Right now, in more than half of US states, thousands of people are getting sick from something hiding in the one food category most of us think of as the safe choice. Fresh produce, not fast food, not undercooked meat, salad, herbs, berries, the things you reach for specifically because you're trying to eat well, and the last place most people think to look for danger. I want to tell you about a woman I'll call Margaret, 69 years old, ate a bagged salad with dinner one evening. Nothing unusual, nothing that smelled or looked off. 4 days later, she had watery diarrhea that wouldn't let up, along with fatigue so heavy she could barely get off the couch. She assumed it was a stomach bug and figured it would pass in a day or two, the way stomach bugs usually do. It didn't. It went on for almost 2 weeks before she finally saw a doctor, and even then, her first stool test came back completely normal because the standard test doctors usually run doesn't catch what she actually had. What Margaret had was cyclosporiasis, an infection caused by a microscopic parasite called Cyclospora, and right now, in the summer of 2026, the United States is in the middle of a genuinely large outbreak of it. This isn't rare or theoretical. As of this month, health officials have confirmed well over 1,600 domestic cases since May and are actively reviewing more than 5,000 additional suspected cases across dozens of states, with case counts likely higher than officially reported since some people recover without ever seeking medical care or getting tested. Michigan alone has reported over 2,600 cases this season. My name is Dr. William Lee. For 21 years, I've worked with adults over 60, and I want to walk you through exactly what this outbreak is, why it's especially dangerous for people in this exact age group, and what you can actually do about it, calmly and practically. Stay with me through everything today because the fourth thing I'm going to cover, how doctors actually test for this, is the exact detail that caused Margaret's illness to go undiagnosed for nearly 2 weeks. And the last thing we'll cover may be the single most important habit for protecting yourself this summer. Quick note before we go further. If you're finding this useful, go ahead and subscribe now. This channel exists to translate exactly this kind of fast-moving health news into something calm and useful rather than something that just makes you anxious. And it helps more people find that when you do. Before we get into the specifics, you need one concept because without it, the rest of this won't fully make sense. I call it the aging gut reality. Here's what changes about how your body handles a parasitic infection like this one after 60. 3 things specifically. First, your immune system's response slows down with age, a process researchers call immunosenescence, which means your body may take longer to recognize and fight off an intestinal parasite compared to when you were younger, giving it more time to cause damage before your body mounts a full response. Second, your body's ability to handle fluid loss changes with age. Kidneys become somewhat less efficient at conserving water, and the thirst signal that should prompt you to drink more becomes less reliable, which means the prolonged watery diarrhea this illness causes can push you toward dangerous dehydration faster than it would in a younger adult. Third, and this is the part most people never hear about, many adults over 60 are also managing chronic conditions like diabetes, heart disease, or are taking medications that affect kidney function. And dehydration on top of those existing conditions doesn't just add risk, it compounds it, straining systems that may already be working with less reserve capacity than they used to. Here's the cascade this creates. The parasite gets past your gut's first line of defense more easily. Watery diarrhea begins, sometimes going on for weeks if untreated. That fluid loss compounds faster in an older body with a less reliable thirst signal. And if you're also managing a chronic condition or certain medications, that dehydration can trigger complications entirely separate from the original infection, sometimes serious enough to require hospitalization. Keep the aging gut reality in mind as we go through everything today, because it's exactly why this particular outbreak deserves more of your attention than an ordinary summer stomach bug would. Now take a moment and think about how you typically handle a stomach bug. Do you remember bouncing back within a day or two, drinking a little extra water, and going about your week? A lot of people assume any stomach illness follows that same short, predictable pattern. If you've ever had a stomach bug that dragged on far longer than it should have, weeks instead of days, this video was made specifically for you because that pattern is actually one of the clearest signs that points toward this specific parasite rather than an ordinary virus. Here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. This outbreak is genuinely serious, and I'm not going to downplay that. But it is also very manageable once you understand what you're dealing with. This isn't a mysterious, unstoppable threat. The parasite is well understood, the treatment is well established, and the precautions that reduce your risk are simple. The challenge with this particular outbreak has been detection and awareness, not a lack of good solutions once an infection is correctly identified. Before we go deeper, if you'd like a simple way to track your own health habits and stay ahead of exactly this kind of seasonal risk, I've put together a free longevity guide linked in the description below. Thousands of people in this community already use it. Go grab it now, and we'll keep working through today's topic together. So, how does this actually work biologically? Picture Cyclospora as an extremely small single-celled organism, far too small to see, that lives in human feces and can end up on fresh produce when that produce comes into contact with contaminated water or soil during growing, washing, or handling, often far upstream of your grocery store. Once you eat that contaminated produce, the parasite settles into your small intestine and begins damaging the lining there, which is the part of your gut responsible for absorbing water and nutrients from food. That damage is exactly why the hallmark symptom is watery diarrhea, sometimes explosive and frequent, along with cramping, bloating, fatigue, nausea, and a loss of appetite that can lead to real weight loss if the illness drags on. Symptoms can improve for a few days and then return, which is a pattern fairly unique to this particular parasite, and one that often confuses both patients and doctors trying to figure out what's going on. Now that you understand the basic mechanism, let's talk about why this particular outbreak has been so hard to trace and what that means for you. There's a reason tracing the exact source has taken so long this time, and understanding it helps explain why officials are urging general precaution rather than pointing to one specific product. Cyclospora has an unusually long incubation period compared to many foodborne illnesses, often a week and sometimes closer to 2 weeks, between exposure and symptoms. Investigators typically trace an outbreak by interviewing sick people about everything they ate in the days beforehand, but with a 2-week window, most people simply can't recall every meal, every salad, every garnish with enough precision to identify a single common thread. On top of that, produce is often combined from multiple sources before it ever reaches a plate, a mixed salad, a garnish on a sandwich, a smoothie with several fruits blended together, which makes it genuinely difficult to isolate which single ingredient, if any single one, is responsible. It's also worth knowing that public health reporting for this specific illness became voluntary rather than mandatory at the federal level roughly a year before this outbreak began, which means official case counts have likely been undercounting the true scale, and state-level numbers have often run well ahead of federal totals. None of this is meant to alarm you. It's meant to explain honestly why wait for officials to name the exact source isn't a reliable strategy this particular summer, and why the practical precautions we're about to cover matter more than usual. Health investigators have been unusually open about how difficult this outbreak has been to pin down. As of early to mid-July, officials still have not identified a single common food source responsible for the surging cases, despite the case count climbing into the thousands across more than 30 states, with Michigan alone reporting more than 2,600 cases, including dozens of hospitalizations. Historically, past Cyclospora outbreaks in the U.S. have been traced to specific items like fresh raspberries, basil, cilantro, snow peas, and bagged lettuce or salad mixes, and cooking produced thoroughly, heating it to at least 158 degrees Fahrenheit, is known to kill the parasite entirely. That's not a small detail, that's a genuinely useful, actionable fact, and it changes how we should think about raw produce specifically during outbreak season, which typically runs from May through August. It's also worth knowing that domestic outbreaks like this one aren't the only way people are getting sick right now. A meaningful share of this year's reported cases were acquired by people traveling outside the U.S. and eating or drinking something contaminated abroad, then returning home before symptoms even appeared. If you or a family member has traveled internationally in the past 2 weeks and develops the kind of prolonged, watery diarrhea we're describing today, that travel history is worth mentioning to your doctor just as clearly as a recent salad would be, since it points to the same underlying illness through a different route of exposure. I want to walk you through 4 things today: why older adults face the highest risk, how to tell this apart from an ordinary stomach bug, why testing for it is trickier than most people realize, and what actually works to treat it, along with how to protect yourself going forward. And that testing piece is the one most people have never heard explained clearly, so stay with me because it directly affects how quickly you get properly diagnosed if this ever happened to you. Let's start with why age itself raises the stakes here. Robert was 73, otherwise healthy, and management of his blood pressure medication became noticeably more complicated once persistent diarrhea and dehydration entered the picture, something his doctor hadn't anticipated needing to address that month. Most people assume a parasite infection is just an unpleasant few days, regardless of age. That's not the full picture for adults over 60, and especially not for anyone who is immunocompromised or managing a chronic illness. Health officials have specifically flagged older adults, along with young children and people with weakened immune systems, as facing the greatest risk of complications from this illness, primarily because of the dehydration that comes with prolonged watery diarrhea. Losing significant fluid over days or weeks strains the kidneys, can worsen blood pressure control, and can interact with medications like diuretics that are already affecting your fluid balance. The practical takeaway here is straightforward. If you're over 60 and experience diarrhea lasting more than 2 or 3 days, don't wait it out the way you might have in your 40s. Contact your doctor and mention explicitly that you want cyclosporiasis considered, especially if you've eaten fresh produce like salad greens, herbs, or berries recently. The mistake most people make is assuming any stomach bug will simply resolve on its own within a few days, when this particular illness is specifically known for not following that pattern. It's worth being specific about which medications deserve extra attention here, since this is exactly the kind of detail that's easy to overlook in the moment. Diuretics, ACE inhibitors, and certain blood pressure or heart medications all depend on your body maintaining a reasonably stable fluid and electrolyte balance to work safely. When you're losing significant fluid through prolonged diarrhea, those same medications can behave differently than they normally would, sometimes dropping blood pressure further than intended or straining kidneys that are already working harder to compensate for fluid loss. This isn't a reason to stop any medication on your own. It's a reason to loop your doctor in promptly rather than assuming you can simply ride out the illness the same way you'd manage it in your 30s. If you're immunocompromised specifically, whether from a condition like cancer, an organ transplant, HIV, or medications like long-term steroids or other immune-suppressing drugs, this illness deserves even more prompt attention. A weakened immune system doesn't just mean a longer recovery. In some cases, it can allow the infection to persist longer or return after seemingly clearing, since your body has less capacity to fully eliminate the parasite on its own, even after treatment. If this applies to you, don't wait to see if symptoms improve before reaching out to your doctor, and be explicit that you're immunocompromised when you do, since that detail can change how quickly a provider decides to test and treat. Now, distinguishing this from an ordinary stomach bug works on a slightly different piece of information, and this is one most people have never had reason to learn before this outbreak. Eleanor was 66, and what caught her doctor's attention wasn't just the diarrhea itself, but how long it had been going on, and the fact that it seemed to ease up for a couple of days before coming back just as strong. Most people think all stomach bugs look roughly the same: a rough day or two, then recovery. Cyclosporiasis behaves differently in a few identifiable ways. The diarrhea is frequently described as watery and sometimes explosive, occurring many times a day. It's often accompanied by significant fatigue and bloating that feels disproportionate to a typical short-lived stomach virus, and critically, symptoms can seem to improve for a few days and then relapse, a pattern that a garden variety norovirus or food poisoning typically doesn't follow. The incubation period also tends to be longer than people expect. Symptoms often don't show up until roughly a week after exposure and can take up to 2 weeks in some cases, which makes it genuinely hard for anyone to connect their illness back to a specific meal. The practical usage detail here is about timing your response. If diarrhea lasts beyond about a week, especially if it's been improving and worsening in that back and forth pattern, or if it's accompanied by real fatigue and weight loss, that's specific enough to bring up by name with your doctor, not just describe as a stomach thing that won't go away. The mistake most people make is waiting for the illness to simply run its course the way a 2-day bug would, losing valuable time before getting properly tested and treated. Quick pause here. Has anyone in your life dealt with diarrhea that dragged on for more than a week or two this summer? Drop a comment and let me know. Given how widespread this outbreak has become, you might be surprised how many people watching this have a story just like Margaret's. Now, testing works on a completely different mechanism than most people expect, and this is genuinely the detail that trips up even careful patients. Frank was 71, went to his doctor with persistent diarrhea, had a standard stool test done, and was told the results were normal, which left him and his doctor both puzzled for another week before someone thought to test specifically for Cyclospora. Most people assume that a general stool test checks for everything relevant, parasites included. That's not accurate, and it's a genuinely important gap to understand. Cyclospora requires a specific type of testing, either a specialized staining technique called modified acid-fast staining, or molecular test called PCR, and it is frequently missed by the routine stool cultures and standard diarrhea panels that many doctors order as a first step. This isn't of your doctor's competence. It reflects that Cyclospora simply isn't part of the default panel most labs run automatically. The practical usage detail here matters enormously. If you have persistent watery diarrhea, especially during summer months, and especially if you know there's an active outbreak, specifically ask your doctor whether the stool test being ordered will test for Cyclospora, or request that it be added if it wasn't included initially. The mistake most people make, exactly like Frank, is accepting a normal result at face value without confirming that the right specific test was actually run, and then losing more time to an illness that could have been correctly diagnosed at the very first visit. All right? Everything up to this point has mattered, but what I'm about to share now is where the real conversation begins, because it covers what actually works and what doesn't once you have a diagnosis. Here it is, the one that changes the conversation entirely. Proper treatment versus the unproven alternative so many people reach for first. The strongest, best established treatment for Cyclospora iasis is a specific antibiotic combination called trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole, often known by the brand name Bactrim. It remains the preferred evidence-backed therapy, and treatment options for people with a sulfa allergy are considerably less well studied, which is exactly why an accurate diagnosis matters so much before treatment even begins. And here's why so many people don't get better as quickly as they should. Instead of getting properly tested and treated with this specific proven antibiotic, some people turn to over-the-counter parasite cleanse supplements, hoping to address the problem naturally. I want to be direct and calm about this because I know these products are marketed heavily and can sound appealing. These cleanse supplements are not regulated the same way prescription medications are. They have not been shown in credible research to effectively treat a confirmed Cyclospora infection, and relying on them instead of proper antibiotics simply allows the infection and the dehydration risk that comes with it to continue unchecked. You don't need an unproven cleanse. Here's what the evidence actually supports. If you're diagnosed with Cyclospora iasis, trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole is the treatment your doctor will most likely reach for, typically taken as a course over roughly a week to 10 days, and most people begin improving within a few days of starting it. Though full recovery of energy and appetite can take somewhat longer. If you have a sulfa allergy, tell your doctor immediately so they can discuss the alternative options available, since those alternatives require closer follow-up given the more limited research behind them. One more piece is worth knowing before we move to your checklist because it directly affects how you'll judge whether treatment actually worked. Because this parasite is known for that improve then relapse pattern we discussed earlier, feeling better a few days into antibiotic treatment doesn't automatically mean the infection is fully cleared. Most people do respond well to a full course of trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole, but if symptoms return after finishing the prescribed course, that's worth reporting back to your doctor rather than assuming it's a separate, unrelated stomach issue. This is particularly relevant for anyone who is immunocompromised, since relapse after treatment is more common in that group specifically. The takeaway isn't to expect relapse. Most people don't experience one, but simply to know that finishing the antibiotic course is the beginning of confirming recovery, not automatically the end of the conversation with your doctor. Before your 30-day challenge, I want to leave you with a tool you can bring to a doctor's visit if you or someone you love develop symptoms like these this summer. I call it the Cyclospora Clarity Checklist. 5 questions, and any good physician will welcome every one of them. First, given my symptoms and their duration, should we specifically test for Cyclospora rather than just running a standard stool panel? Second, if the standard test comes back normal but my symptoms are persisting, would a specialized acid-fast stain or PCR test make sense as the next step? Third, given my age and any chronic conditions I have, how closely should we be monitoring my hydration and fluid levels while we wait for results or treatment to take effect? Fourth, if I'm diagnosed, is trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole appropriate for me given my other medications and any allergies? Fifth, are there specific signs that would mean I need to go to an emergency room rather than waiting for a scheduled follow-up? While we're on that last question, it's worth knowing the general answer in advance, since dehydration can build gradually, and it helps to recognize it before it becomes a genuine emergency. Watch for a significantly reduced need to urinate or urine that's noticeably darker than usual. Watch for dizziness or lightheadedness when standing up, a dry mouth that doesn't improve with sipping water, unusual confusion, or a rapid heartbeat that doesn't settle down. Any one of these, especially in combination, particularly alongside diarrhea that's already gone on for several days, is a reasonable trigger to seek same-day care rather than waiting for a routine appointment. This isn't about causing alarm over ordinary tiredness from being sick. It's about knowing the specific signals that mean your body needs more support than fluids and rest alone can provide. If your doctor brushes off those 5 questions during an active, widely reported outbreak like this one, that tells you something important too about how closely your concerns are being taken. Here's your challenge, and given the season, I'd encourage you to start today rather than waiting. For the next 30 days, take 3 simple precautions. Wash all fresh produce thoroughly under running water, including herbs and produce with skins you don't eat since contamination can sit on the surface. Consider cooking produce when practical, particularly leafy greens and herbs, since heat effectively kills the parasite. A few more concrete details make this easier to apply day to day. Historically, the produce items most often linked to past Cyclospora outbreaks have included fresh raspberries, basil, cilantro, snow peas, and bagged lettuce or salad mixes. So if you're looking for where to focus a little extra caution, those specific items are a reasonable place to start without needing to avoid fresh produce broadly. Rinsing under running water helps, but won't eliminate all risk on its own, since the parasite can be difficult to fully remove even with thorough washing, which is exactly why cooking when it's a realistic option for a given ingredient offers more complete protection. It's also worth remembering that this illness spreads through contaminated food or water, not from person to person through casual contact, so there's no need to isolate from family members if someone in your household is diagnosed. Ordinary hand hygiene before and after food preparation remains the more relevant precaution. One last practical habit worth building into your routine at the grocery store itself: keep an eye on where your produce is coming from when that information is available, and don't hesitate to ask store staff about sourcing for pre-washed bagged greens specifically, since those convenience products have historically been implicated in several past outbreaks. This isn't about becoming suspicious of every bag of lettuce. It's about the same kind of reasonable awareness you'd already apply to expiration dates or bruised produce. Just extend it slightly further during a season when officials are actively telling us they haven't yet pinned down a single source. And pay attention to your own body. If diarrhea lasts more than 2 to 3 days, don't wait it out. Contact your doctor and mention this outbreak by name. Write down today whether you currently know the signs of dehydration, dizziness, dark urine, dry mouth, unusual fatigue, since that knowledge is exactly what helps you catch a problem early rather than late. Revisit that question in 30 days. You don't need to avoid fresh produce altogether. That would mean giving up foods that are genuinely good for you the rest of the year. You need reasonable, consistent precautions during an active outbreak, and the peace of mind that comes with knowing what to watch for will genuinely serve you well beyond just this summer. There's real difference between healthcare that reacts once you're already seriously ill and healthcare that catches a problem early while it's still straightforward to treat. With an illness like this one spreading quietly through something as ordinary as a salad, that difference is enormous. The best physicians I've known in 21 years of practice understand that clear information delivered calmly is often the single most protective thing they can offer a patient, especially during a fast-moving public health situation like this. You've probably seen headlines about this outbreak that lean toward alarm rather than clarity, and I understand why those headlines get attention. But that's not the approach I've taken with you today, and it's not how I've approached 21 years of caring for people exactly your age. You're not powerless here, and this isn't a threat you need to feel anxious about every time you buy a salad. You have every right to understand exactly what this illness is, how it's diagnosed, and what protects you, and now you do. Start today, wash your produce carefully, watch your body's signals honestly, and don't hesitate to name this illness, specifically if you or someone you love develops symptoms that don't resolve quickly. If this gave you something useful, go ahead and subscribe. That's exactly what this channel is built for: calm, honest, science-based guidance without the extremes you see everywhere else online. And don't forget the free longevity guide linked below if you want a structured way to bring all of this together. I'll see you in the next one.